Men rising up to end the silence around us about the chains that bind us, to dispel the darkness of illusion with luminous spiritual technologies, to finally become the hero within us all. This is Arise the Honest Man's Podcast, episode 47. My dear Jai Jagannath Prabhu is by my side, like every single time. And his smiling face makes my heart happy. And one of our dearest friends, Dave Madhava, is also with us again. He's been with us many times and certainly one of our favorites. And today's episode is going to be a whopper. Living a ruled life. What was your tagline, Jai?
Regular principles of freedom or bondage? ?
There we go. Okay, Jai. Carry on.
Well, I have no special introduction. There was the desire for this episode was prompted by an incident that happened on your Facebook page. You put up some pictures of you at perhaps some gathering or some party, and apparently you didn't have neck beads on, and that disturbed. Oh, I'd say this. Well, it just seemed to disturb one person who apparently called you a demon for not having, or that you looked like a demon because you didn't have neck beads on. And another, I guess, friend of yours asked, "Well, did you lose your neck beads? Like, what's going on?" And I have to say that friend who asked that question, Nam Ross sent me his picture this morning. His neck beads are on point. His neck beads are like stacked, they look good. He's looking so, and that prompted a certain, sort of irritation in you, at least as you reported it to me in a casual conversation. And he was like, "We should do an episode about this." And I was like, "Yeah." So maybe if you want to flesh it out a little bit more, but that's all that I got there.
Yeah. So I had posted I posted some pictures of me at an event at the beginning of October called Scintilla, which is like a miniature version of like a Burning Man type festival, based on these really, really beautiful principles of community. And I was just very curious to experience what it would be like to be in that space. And I had an exceedingly joyful experience. It was really just so life affirming, the amount of warmth and affection and acceptance between people, and just the sheer joy that was felt in the space. And anyway, I'll get to some more details later on. So I posted some pictures of my experience, and I wasn't wearing neck beads. Now I'll begin by saying the main reason why I wasn't wearing neck beads is because my neck beads got bust, and I have these tiny little 3-string neck beads from my initiation, and it's just I'm just honestly too lazy to fix them. Like I'm too lazy to fix them. So I've just kind of been rocking without for some time. So I post these pictures, and then this one person who I don't even know why I had them on Facebook.
It wouldn't be the internet if you knew them and they called you a demon.
Oh my God, bro. Anyway, this guy's like, "You look like a demon without Tulsi mala on." And I was just, and my first reaction was just like, "Bro, GTFO. Honestly, like, I'm not gonna deal with your energy." And I, deleted the comment and basically got rid of this person. Cancel culture, whoa. But I was thinking in retrospect, like, I should have actually said, thank you so much for recognizing my true nature. I am indeed.
That would have been my response, 100%.
Yeah.
Oh my God, thank you for seeing me for who I really am.
Yeah, bro. Like, I was thinking that, but anyway, I was just kind of appalled by the fanaticism, And so then another person made a comment and said, like, lost the neck beads, with like a little surprised face. And then I commented back and said, well, actually, yes. But then I asked the question, do I really have to wear neck beads in order to be like a valid and worthy devotee? And
yes.
Then he was like,
yes.
Then he was like, oh, gosh, he was like, Well, it depends on who you ask. Maybe it should be a topic for the next podcast. And and I thought, well, that was a really great idea. So you know, Jai got in touch with you and said, well, let's talk about this thing. Like, how important are the externals really to define our identity as Bhaktas? And here we are, and I guess now it's kind of been fleshed out into, you know, the sort of like broader principles of purity and standards of behavior that are commonly mandated in our international society. um Anyway, I mean, I have a ton to say. I'm in a very like I'm in a very interesting different sort of exploratory phase of my life right now. And Madma's Madma's in England, but yeah, I mean, sure. um Thanks, Sinduri. Anyway, so yeah, okay, but let's kind of, yeah, like, where are we gonna go? Where are we gonna
Well,
go? Because
let's start with that question. How important are the neck beads or the externals was the language that you use. The way I framed it was how important are the externals to identity formation? Because clearly the person who made that more aggressive comment, and I think the way that we generally think about Tulsi Mala is in terms of our identity as a devotee. So how important are externals to identity formation? Maybe we could start there. That's how I framed the question. Maybe that's not the best way of framing it, but that's kind of how let's kick it off from there. Some thoughts on that? You know, my younger self would be like, absolutely not important. And I have my quotes for that also. But now I feel like I have a little bit more of a nuanced perspective on that. But let's hear from David first.
let's hear
What are
from
your
Deva.
thoughts?
Yeah.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on this?
I'm the first one that has to actually say something.
Of course, bro.
Well, I guess I'll just viscerally, I get a little cringe inside when I hear Tulsi Mala called external.
Right. Yeah,
And
interesting.
and that's coming from and the reason behind that, and it's something that I've certainly grappled with both as a leader of a community and also just somebody trying to be a devotee, that we do kind of, I'll use a heavy word here, we do kind of prostitute sacred things for substandard purposes of the institution. So Tulsi Mala, which is meant to be something sacred and like an opportunity to connect with a pure devotee, that's our philosophical conception, becomes just this kind of branding of the institution that I'm a good boy or a good girl, or I'm not because I'm wearing them. And the real import of that, the sacred item, is totally lost, totally obfuscated by that institutional concern. So I yeah, that's where I'll start it.
That's interesting. Okay, Tulsi is an external, except I also cringed. I was like, no, that's like not, that's internal energy. That's for Shakti. What do you mean external? Okay, but let's just take it for granted. At least the way, let's say, a person entering into the community may view it as something external. Like if someone was new to Christian consciousness and they were like getting interested to take it up more, and they're told you should wear Tulsi Mala, the way it would likely be processed, well, that's external. What does that have to do with my internal devotion? Maybe they haven't learned all the tattwas underpinning, like
Sure.
Tulsi and so on. So just as a general principle, knowing that is an external, but basically it being seen that way, depending on where you're at in your self identity as a devotee, that may be actually seen as an external. Then how important is that to our identity formation? Like how critical is that? Can we go without it?
My wife Vrindavani has helped me appreciate this in our conversations, because she grew up in the movement and she's seen young people who eventually become mature devotees, like you could say internal devotees, who were born in the culture, and she's seen many more who kind of fell away. And she noticed that there was, for everybody who became serious, there was a time around their teenage years, as one is really trying to figure out who am I, what am I, as compared to everything else and everyone else in the world. There was a time for basically everyone that became serious in their adult years where they really were like a Haribol Bhakta of sorts in the Gurukuli way, but they were totally sold out to the externals of the culture. They wore all the nice saris or all the nice dhotis, and they had the best neck beads with the special carvings and the earrings and the Radhakund tilak. You know, they went all out with looking like a devotee, because that's about all you can do when you're 15 or 16.
Sure.
Is look like you're something, because internally there's not much to go on yet. And in that way, she's helped me appreciate that it's helpful and healthy to let people, when they're coming in, have some of these external anchors to kind of hold on to. And that's why I say, I use that heavy word prostitute, but it's not always like that. It's a helpful indication, or like, yeah, it's a low-hanging fruit. Let's put it that way. It's a low-hanging fruit for somebody to be like, yeah, I'm part of the club now.
Right.
And internally, it takes some more time before you really even understand what the club is about. We've all been there and had our conceptions, like, you know, a come to God moment after we thought we've come to God. And but those externals are like, all right, at least I still got my Tulsi. At least I still know how to tie a dhoti, and I can say the tilak mantras. Like, it provides some sense of shelter and identity when our identity gets challenged regularly by the real standards of our process.
Very nicely said. I wanna sorry to cut you off. I want to put the same question to you, Karuna Avatar, but I wanted to preamble it. That's not the right word. I wanted to preface. I wanted to preface it by this quote. I was looking for this quote from Jaiva Dharma. It comes in the very outside. I think it comes in chapter 3 of the first part of Jaiva Dharma. And in that part, Sannyas Thakur, because it opens up with an impersonal sannyasi.
Yeah.
And after he gets converted to Vaishnavism by the association of a pure Bhakta, there's this one point where he just like really adorns the externals of Bhakti. And he's like warned against that by saying that if you too quickly embrace the externals, then it makes it very hard. And the way I remember the language, and this is a paraphrase, I was looking for the quote to get it more precise, but the way I remembered it is that it makes it very difficult to discipline the internal, because you've already think that you've like situated, or you've like, I've done it. Like you said, it takes a long time to realize that, oh, I'm having my come to God moment after I thought I had my come to God moment. So if you're too much embrace the externals, it makes it really hard to discipline the internal. And in that way, it can create a really good space for a lot of duplicity and just cheating mentality. And so a lot of the way that I heard Karuna Avatar suggestion to do this episode, my mind immediately went to that particular statement of Thakur Bhakti Vinod. Like, yeah, if we're too quick on that part, then it's like the external parts are outpacing the internal development. And in that way, it leaves a lot of room for just like, you know, Kaitava Dharma, like cheating mentality and so on. So I kind of want to preface that and say, am I right to assume that's how I heard it, honestly, when you suggested the episode? I wanted to see your processing around this.
Absolutely. I mean, I can confirm all of this, like, very from a place of like very visceral personal experience. When I first came to Krishna consciousness, I was 19, coming out of my teenage years of immense loneliness and lacking belonging and lacking warmth and family and whatever, with parents who got divorced when I was very little. And at that time, I was just so hungry for a community and a sense of belonging and, you know, being a part of something. And I had always been very philosophically minded, so I had certainly been looking for the truth. And then when I came to Krishna consciousness, the ashram that I joined and became involved with, you know, there was a very, very strong like brahmachari ethic, you know, like the all these very, very disciplined external practices, the way that we look, the way that we behave, the way that we eat, the way that we do everything, the way that we bathe. The the leader of the ashram at the time was almost
the
like
way you clean your behind.
Yeah, you don't even know how to wipe.
You don't even know how to wipe your ass. You know, that's
like.
in there.
I like the leader of the ashram was like fanatic. He was like a sattva fanatic. Almost to the extent, yeah, he became militant. He once walked in on me when I was taking a shower without a gumsha on, and like almost had a heart attack. And you know, then that kind of like led to the entire ashram being crammed into the bathroom for like a how to shower like coaching session. um
Hare
you know,
Krishna.
how to use your gumsha, how to clean your behind whilst using a gumsha, you know, the whole thing. So anyway, it was a very, very intense kind of focus on the externals. And because I was so hungry for like belonging and a sense of family and community and brotherhood, I just wholeheartedly dove headfirst into all of it. But that lasted me a solid 18 months. And then after about 18 months, we were in India and we were walking in Varanasi next to the Ganges. And you know, Varanasi is a really far out place. Saw like a bunch of these like young bohemians, western seeker kind of kids, like all bright eyed and discovering so many new things. And there I was with what looked like a freaking, what do you call it, like a hedgehog that like crash landed on the back of my head, in the shape of my really rough and unrefined chica. And you know, my
Right.
100%. And my bed sheets, and I felt like I was in such a box, you know. I felt like I was in such a defined box. And I just at that time it just sort of like planted a seed. So in 2015 I went on a little detour and I moved out of the ashram, and I was sort of like, you know, exploring and doing all sorts of things again, and you know, the whole thing. um and then came back to Krishna consciousness about a year later with like a way more sort of like, but in a much more sort of, David, you hate this word, but like balanced way, you know. And this leader had left at the time, so the ashram was just like a bunch of young guys enthusiastic about Krishna consciousness, but whilst establishing themselves in the world. And I proceeded with my studies living in the ashram. Anyway, so I can really confirm that that super intense like hammering on the externals definitely will make a person burn out at the end. You know, like if our ethic in the ashram to begin with had been one of, you know, let's be sensible and realize that all these young men are probably gonna, you know, proceed to household life, and how do we get you to develop in Krishna consciousness whilst developing materially, etc., could have been more balanced. So yeah, I mean, I could just definitely confirm that. Anyway, I have a lot more to share concerning where I'm at, and maybe some other reasons why, you know, I'm not wearing neck beads right now. I don't know if I should do that now, or maybe if you guys
Well,
have some thoughts that you'd
I
like
have
to
some
share.
thoughts, and I have some thoughts that may lead to maybe naturally that part of what you
Sure,
want to
sure.
share. I think
Mm,
my first thoughts go to, like I said, hearing this question and pondering the question myself, I would have definitely been like, yeah, externals aren't really that important. Certainly, they should not outpace the internal development. But then, as I was thinking about it a little bit more, I was like, I don't know, because, and as Deva Madhava's story also kind of demonstrates about the Guru Kulis who made it, so to speak, in the long term, there's something to be said for how externals help identity formation, like the sense of being a devotee. And I think I have a question for you about this at the end of my little thought
mm,
process
mm,
here. But like,
mm,
anyway, so I encountered a video about a week ago from it's like a philosophy channel that I like to listen to every now and again, and it was talking about this sort of notion of identity formation
mm,
mechanisms, and it basically gave two broad ideas that you encountered in the Western world not too long ago, and the one you encounter kind of now. Well, kind of three. What the identity formation mechanisms was categorized as sincere and authentic. These were the two broad categories. And sincere was like the idea that you built your self concept by looking at the roles around you and
mm.
then trying to step into those roles. And to the
Uh,
degree you were able to step into those roles, you were called as sincere. And that was
uh,
basically the model that probably the old traditional world the world over followed. There were the set roles
Mm.
of society, and you were, especially as a child, looking at the different roles, you can understand, okay, I'm expected to play this particular role. And then your ability to step into that role constituted as sincere. And so the whole
Mm.
identity formation mechanism was based on sincerity, being able to step into a particular role. Whereas in the sort of postmodern West, a newer idea emerged where it was authentic,
Mm.
because sincerity can be like a very stunted,
Mm.
can make a person feel very stunted in their ability to fully express themselves. So in the authentic model, it's about you building your identity without this help or support of any of
Mm.
these roles. And you just
Mm.
have to take full responsibility for building yourself, who you want to be, who you want to become in the world. And that, like
Mm.
everything in the material world, there's a trade-off there. Like if you're a really responsible person, you're probably going to embrace the opportunity to fully develop that. But most people require a little bit more support
Mm.
when forming their identity. So,
Yeah.
so then there's this model, and then he mentioned a third category, which kind of pertains to our generation with social media, which is very interesting. And the word that was used was profilicity, and it was a take from some book. I forget what he said, but the word profile, right? Profile. So profilicity. So profilicity is this thing where you're looking at different people's profiles, and you're basically expected, or there's like this subtle thing that's taking place where you're mimicking the profiles that
Mm.
you like to watch and follow. So it starts to kind of like
Yeah.
revert to this sincere program, whereas instead of there being like a sort of religious or scripturally informed role models, it's these profiles that become the profiles with the most likes and the most shares and the most followers become like the standard um sort of archetypes that you're expected to mimic or step into,
Mm. Mm.
and you're judged on your ability to do so, which kind of looks
Mm.
like the sincere model, except it's secularly informed instead of scripturally informed. And
Mm.
so our generation, I feel like the millennials and a little bit of Gen Z, because we're part of the postmodern culture, we kind of philosophically in our heads at least embrace the idea of authenticity. Yeah, just be who you want to be and no one else should tell me anything and so on. Although what happens practically is this profilicity thing, especially now with social media, where we're mimicking the popular, sort of archetypes of what it means to be
Mm.
even human. And then when such people like us, so we're philosophically authentic, we're practically prophylactic. Okay, that word is itself made up, so I'm gonna go with it. And then we come to Kari Krishna, and then we're expected to be sincere by stepping into these sort of fixed roles of what it means to be a devotee, and you
Yeah.
step into that and demonstrate your sincerity. And so if you're not able to do that in a community that's trying to be sincere, then that's going to constitute a problem for the collective, and they're going to be critical. So this made my thinking about externals like a lot more nuanced in how I experienced it and how I encountered it.
Mm.
Anyway, so then that leads to my question. I tried my best to articulate that as well as I could,
No, that
but
was great.
it was a little sloppy. But this leads to my question to you and to Dave also. Is the question is, what's wrong with the role? Is there something wrong with the roles of devotees that's presented to us that makes us not want to be sincere? And so far as step into those roles, in other words, is there something about the archetypes that are presented to us? And when I say archetypes, I don't mean like the gopis of Braj or even the Nitya Navadvip archetypes. I'm talking about the devotees that are contemporary to us and that are considered like quote unquote ideal devotees, and that we're expected to like follow that and step into that. Is there something about that image that inspires in us a sort of recalcitrance or
Mm.
resistance to stepping into that? And I think for
Mm.
me, the answer is definitely a yes. But I
Mm.
wanted to, with that big preface I spoke by, that's the
Mm.
question I'm going to put on the table. It feels like, because I heard this from you when I heard you put this for Karuna Avatar, I kind of heard it in my head like that. There's something about the roles that are presented to us that makes us resist being sincere. And
Mm.
so far as stepping in, like, no, I don't want to step into that. I don't want to have anything to do with that. And so confirmation, yes, no, let's talk about that. I want to talk about that.
I think it's pretty case specific.
Sure.
And what it really boils down to is, to use the sort of language that we've been introduced to now, is it really depends on the perceived authenticity of the given person, who may be a role model or someone that you look up to, or a kind of a role that you're looking at, like, and that is a very personal sense that you may get. Like, you look at someone, you look at a given role, and you see how authentically is this elder, this exemplar, this idol, um like, actually imbibing this particular role, or this archetype, or this framework of behavior, right? um that, I believe, is very, very personal. Now, I just want to make a brief comment on what you'd said a little bit earlier, about this rift between the sincere model and the authentic model. Is, we tend to think, so is this the right word, didactically, like, very much like either or. I do not believe that it's either or. I believe that we need both. We need to be encouraged to express ourselves authentically, which is one of the two fundamental needs that children have and need from their parents. They need to be encouraged to express themselves authentically, and then they need unconditional acceptance. Obviously, but then, at the same time, you also have universal principles of virtue and truth, and you have universal archetypes of being. So we need to be exposed to both. We need to be encouraged to find ourselves as an individual, whilst remaining exposed and being cognizant of the particular roles, or like streams of being, that we may find ourselves flowing with. Anyway, that's what I'll say to begin with. Deva, I'm very curious to hear what Deva's thoughts are.
I like that comment, Karuna. And remember, you can always use words like integration and harmony to supplant balance.
100%.
So anyway,
for y'all who don't know why we're laughing, it's sort of an inside thing. David Maru does not like this word balance. Anytime anyone uses the word balance in any of our sanghas, he like goes off on a 5 to 10 minute riff about that is not a good word to use. So it's kind of like an inside joke. That's why we're laughing about it, just to give some context for this laughter. All right.
I don't have to go off on 5 or 10 minute riffs anymore. So I've done my work. Dai, when you were discussing, you gave those 3 different models, and even in the postmodern vortex that we exist in today, still, as the profilation framing goes, you see there's a need to identify with something external. Right. There's a need to take reference from the outside. And in our in our community, there's the narration in the Bhagavatam of Lord Brahma, who's sitting on the lotus in a vacuum. He's alone. And I think about this pastime often when thinking about individuation and how someone develops. Lord Brahma, with his immense intelligence, is also having a hard time understanding who he is when he has nothing else to reference or go off of. When there's no mirror in front of him, no walls to reflect and contextualize. Lord Brahma has a hard time. What to speak of little old me? Right. So the postmodern idea that I should be able to individuate myself separate from and remove from the influence of anyone else it's a fallacy, it's a false hope, and it's a very dangerous one that causes people to exist in all levels of psychosis that we see today, lived out through porn and video games and drugs, etc. Then Karuna, to your point about the need to like actually appreciate the person who's living to said principle of the community or said principle of the universe. I have to have faith in the individual. I feel like that's a very important thing that is lost in the most institutions' messaging, is just trust us. the plural we, right? Just the general
personal we.
right, the plural we,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
general
yeah.
mass of us. Just trust us. And we're like, no, bro.
No, absolutely not.
There's too many reasons not to. So it becomes very distasteful as soon as one gets a little maturity. It becomes very distasteful to just have to have blanket acceptance of everyone and trust of everyone in front of me just because they have neck beads on. And it brings someone to the point of rejecting wearing neck beads. Not saying that you're doing that, Karuna, but I've seen that happen to people. They reject all elements of Vaishnav culture because they're being forced to accept these people who are supposed members of Vaishnav culture, speaking because that's our context, who are not in any way someone who really moves your heart and inspires you. And then a final thought. I don't want to run too long, but there's something I've written to friends about, and I've been conceiving of how to kind of share this more publicly. I call it Gaurangas Generation Gap. And our present generation is facing a huge social challenge, and we need to be aware of this if we're going to be able to bring the society of devotees forward. Just what a pigeonhole, or like a behind the eight ball, to use an American term of phrase, it's like what a hard position we're put in, that in the Hare Krishna movement in general, there are 60 and 70-year-olds, and then there's 20 and 30 somethings. There was a holocaust of faith in the 80s and 90s, which basically it exterminated all people who are supposed to be in between us and the 70 somethings. We're not supposed to be interfacing with 70-year-old and 80-year-old now people as our prime exemplars. They're supposed to be the elder.
Right.
We're supposed to have 40 somethings and 50 somethings and oceans of them, right? To be able to show us both directly, but also subtly. We're supposed to be just immersed, saturated in a community with so many variegated examples, such that we don't have to just pick one person or two people and hold on for dear life and pray that we get enough from that connection that we can survive ourselves. But that's the situation we find ourselves in because of what happened after Srila Prabhupada's departure and the trauma in the community, etc. So just knowing that takes a little bit of the pressure off of like accepting the very awkward, very difficult circumstance we're in. But without knowing that, then we have to like resent the 70-year-olds for just being 70-year-olds. Like they just are who they are. But we don't have the 40 somethings and 50 somethings to help soften that blow. And I think just one more touch, because we're all familiar. The Bhakti Center and Denver are two temples in North America, and I'm not familiar with other parts of the world, but the Bhakti Center and Denver are two places which, at least at times, have had this intergenerational leadership. That's what I describe it as. And because of that intergenerational leadership, you have the old exemplars and you have the young, idealistic, naive, take on the world types. But then in between, you have the 30, 40, and 50 somethings to kind of massage all of the understandings needed to harmonize those different perspectives. And in places where you don't have that, you just have suffering and confusion.
Damn, Daiva Madhava, spoken like a
so
harmonizer. Oh,
Holocaust
man.
of faith. That, I mean, first of all, it freaked me out. I was like, ooh. And but it's exactly what the situation is. And that kind of, I have on here my little question sheet here. And I think this might be an appropriate place to ask it also, is that this sort of tension between culture and knowledge, So we know how we're supposed to act as devotees because we're told, we're called demons if we don't act in a certain way or whatever it is. We know what we're supposed to do. And yet the culture that surrounds us in many places that we live, if you're not living in the Dhams, then is a hedonistic demonic culture. And as we all know by practical experience, if there's a tug of war between knowledge and culture is going to win out. That's just the way that works. And so I also, a part of me was feeling like, in regards to this sort of fundamental question, the ruled life, as a devotee living in the midst of a hedonistic atmosphere. Like I'm in New York. New York is hedonism central. I mean, as soon as you get outside and breathe in, you're ready to enjoy. That's just how that works. There is no question of it working another way. It's not like you go outside and like,
Even though it
Shy,
smells like a sewer.
even though it smells like a sewer, but it's just like the atmosphere itself. You're contaminated. There's no way around it. Like Mahaprabhu was talking about, if I see a materialist, I'll jump in the Ganga with my clothes on. I'm like, Mahaprabhu, you got to be practical here. Like, I'm in New York City. I'm not going to jump into the East River, every time I see a materialist, because then I'll be stuck there. Plus, I can't swim very well, so then I'll drown. The problem. So when you have this sort of tension between like the rules that are meant to help nourish and shape our identity as devotees, but we're practicing them surrounded by hedonism, or just surrounded by non-devotees. It doesn't have to be like wild hedonistic culture, just not really around that many devotees. And if there's that tug of war between culture and knowledge, the culture part is going to win. So I was kind of thinking about this question in terms of like, what does it mean to be like a devotee trying to practice bhakti, and when you're always struggling with this tug of war? Like, does that, I one time put this question to some senior devotees: what does Christian consciousness look like followed by demons? And my sense of it was like, I have a demonic birth, I have demonic proclivities. I don't even feel bad about them. That's how I know I'm even like, I have some demonic proclivities, and I'm like, and like, I don't feel guilty. I don't feel any shame if I do something like a little crazy every now and again. I'm like, yeah, that's how that cookie crumbles. Like, and there's probably a problem with my psychology, so I'm gonna just put that out there. I do accept that, but I feel I feel no shame. I give no cares. I'm just like, I'm a demon, but I'm also a devotee. That's still part of my identity. I feel bad if I struggle with my japa, or if that's still part of my identity. So I had this question to seniors, like, what does it look like to be a demon who's a devotee? Like Vitrasura, now he's a pure devotee, so we can't really compare to, but he did have a demonic birth or demonic body. So I was kind of curious about that, and I want to hear with this generational gap thing that you brought up, and therefore we're having to tussle with the hedonistic culture without the support of that
Yeah.
generation. Like, how am I supposed to, what what will a devotee like me look like?
Yeah.
Or what can I expect with this sort of dilemma to be? Like, if I have to step into some role as a devotee and be sincere, what is that going to look like?
Mm. I'd like to introduce an idea now, which I believe is really like the crux of this entire debacle, and I think we've already touched on aspects of it. And what it really comes down to is, for the individual, your ability to follow or to imbibe or respect both principles and details depends solely on the extent to which you feel like well nestled in spiritual community. Like, when you're in community where you feel a sense of belonging, where you feel a sense of family, where you feel a sense of acceptance, where you feel like you're being celebrated, then whether it be principle or detail, it all becomes seamless and effortless. And I think we see this all over our society in healthy communities, as people are just genuinely, because this is just kind of basic, like, human psychology, is like the power of the collective, the power of the group spirit, the power of a unifying philosophy of life, the you know the power of celebrating ultimate beatitude in in a communal setting. It's just like, it just carries you like anything. I mean, I've had this particular experience even outside of the context of bhakti, like in different parts of my life, being being into different exercise disciplines. Like, before I got into triathlon, and before I joined a triathlon squad, I had a certain idea of what my limitations were as a runner, as a swimmer, as a cyclist. And then as soon as you become a part of the squad, and there's always someone that runs or swims or cycles just a little bit faster than you, then you realize like that your limits and everything is just so much further. But anyway, the point is, like, it just takes you so much further when you're well nestled in community and in a collective of people. And I think what underscores the experience of community, or what that really boils down to, is a sense of belonging. Like, when you feel like you belong, then you respect the shared mores and values and cultural, details of the community, because you feel that sense of belonging, and therefore you feel a sense of allegiance and loyalty to what is around you. Um and you know that I want to sort of like say in general, as a sort of a general principle, and then I'm going to make it really personal, and I'm going to say that I from when I first joined Christian consciousness, beginning of 2013, when I was 19, up until the beginning of last year. No, yes, beginning of last year, I was so lucky to be in India in February in Mayapur. It was just before Gurpurnim. I was in a drama. I just got initiated. It was the most ecstatic time in my spiritual life. Then I get back to South Africa. What happens? Pandemic. Boom. Finished. Suddenly I'm in a different city. I'm away from my community. I'm at home. It's just my mom and I. And for the first time in my spiritual life, I'm actually isolated. And in this like isolated space, I managed to carry on for 18 months. And it was a slug. It was a hell of a slug. Deva Madhava Prabhu, we met in that like dark night of the soul phase of my life. I was alone in my spiritual life. Now, gentlemen, I take long to chant japa. Like, it takes me at least 3.5 hours to chant 16 rounds. And I can't sit down and chant. I have to pace because I fall asleep every time. After like 10 mantras, I'm out. So that's just always been my reality. So for 18 months, just like slogging away, chanting, trying to chant, like trying to follow, um, all by myself. And and all this time I'm just holding on to this idea. Okay, I'm going to go to America. I'm going to go and join Dave Madhava Prabhu in Michigan. Maybe I'll be in New York for a while. I'm going to go to America. That's my people. That's where I belong. And I'm just holding on to this idea, this desire to be part of that community, to give me that inspiration. And that's really what kept me going. um and then and the only reason why I couldn't go was because there were all these freaking COVID rules. Like, it was just impossible to get on a plane and actually go to America. Um, and then after 18 months, at the beginning of June, like end of July, I'm sitting on the couch and I've got 4 rounds left. It's Friday night. It's 9:30. I've got my bead bag in my hand, and I'm just like, I can't, just can't do this anymore. So I send Jai a message and I'm like, bro, what do you do on those days when you just feel like you just can't do it? And he's like, well, you just kind of do what you can. Reminds me of my Guru Maharaj's very gentle kind of mood that he had when he was on the podcast a few times, talking about like, what do devotees do when they what should you do, when you feel like you can't be on the level anymore, and just so commit to what you can do, right?
Thank you for not
And
exposing my full answer, which exposed my lack of determination and devotion to Krishna.
no, bro, don't worry, I got you. Anyway, so then, and then I tried that for about a week, and but it was just so empty. It was just so incredibly empty, and I was just like, I mean, I built up like 18 months of like solid like japa trauma, like full on. The amount of times that I'd had to say no to like real human beings that I love and care for. Sorry, I can't spend time with you now. Sorry, I can't talk to you now. I've got to chant these rounds. And it was just it was just done for me. Like, I honestly felt like I couldn't do it anymore. But then luckily I found my calling in my occupation as a relationship therapist, and it was the most life affirming experience, prolonged experience over the past 4 months. Every single day feeling like I'm doing exactly what I am meant to be doing in this body, and feeling such a deep sense of fulfillment and contentment, helping people and supporting people in this particular way, that I mean, honestly, it just like the slog, the 18-month slog, dark night of the soul, isolation, and the sort of like return on investment or lack thereof, that I had gotten, um, by just trying to push on. Um, it just fails to come to to come. There's just really no comparison, and so now I'm in a very like exploratory phase, and I'm not following all the rules and regulations, and I'm not on the level, and I'm not on the standard. But you know what? I am completely 100% okay with that. And I'm completely 100% okay with myself, because the
That's because
pendulum
you're falling, Prabhu.
because the pendulum may swing, but ultimately it's the same pendulum. It's like you're in one extreme, you're pushing, and then you go to the other extreme. But at the end of the day, what does a pendulum do? It can't like stay, in the extreme. It's got to even out at some point. So I'm at a point where I'm just really curious to see how I'm going to find that harmony, Dave Madhava, that integration, um, as both a Bhakta and like, I mean, guys, full disclosure, I am such a sensual person. Like, it's just
No need
like
to disclose. It's obvious.
it's just
This isn't a big reveal.
Yeah.
anyway, some of our listeners may not know, but yeah, I'm a very like sensual, heartfelt, romantic kind of person, and so I'm at a point where I'm just like I'm cool with where I'm at, and I'm just so curious to see like how I'm personally going to find that balance between, you know like being a bhakta and being a gaudiya in my heart, but
Integration.
at the
Integration.
same time,
Find
oh
that
god,
integration.
oh god, I lost it again. Sorry, I'm sorry, my apologies. Anyway,
Well, devotees might be
yeah.
wondering, why is balance such a awkward term, and this is kind of my point, is that you don't want to live a dual life, which is
Mm,
what balance implies. Living a dual life is miserable.
mm.
Having to balance, I'm constantly having to work and juggle, and this is opposed to that. Somehow they have to be reconciled. But what you want is integration, which you say both from each other, your material experience, your devotion, and that's why there's a danger in the idea of balance as it's commonly understood.
Nice.
Right.
Well, what I'm hearing from you, Karuna Avatar, and which is a good question, honestly, and in some ways, the inspiration for this podcast in the first place is the integration of devotee and humanity. And which is interesting.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing to say it like that because devotees are humans. Krishna's Nara Leela is the thing that we want to enter into, and at the same time, it's like, yeah, there's at least there's this feeling within us of the struggle between being like a devotee and then being human, and how those two can be integrated. Deva Madhava Prabhu, I've seen you be successful, and I don't know, I hate to say it this way because it just sounds too woke, but holding space is what's coming in my head. Like for people who are going through that struggle at the Harmony Collective. I mean, I've seen you take in people where I'm like, they are the ghetto. You do not need to be having these people. I'm not gonna name any names, but I have a specific person in my head that I can think of in the very beginning of the Harmony Collective that you kind of gave space to them, even though they were like a wild child. I was like, absolutely not. I would not be having that ghetto anywhere near me. But you were able to like hold that space, and hearing Karuna Avatar also, it sounds like he's a person who could have or can thrive or could be allowed to exist in such a space. So how do you do that? Like hearing Karuna Avatar's articulation of a very real dilemma that I'm sure a lot of us do struggle with, have struggled with, will struggle with in the future. What is your advice or for holding
Mm.
space for such a person who's dealing with that dynamic in their life?
Like, I did grow up in the ghetto, so I'm not so intimidated by it.
I grew up in the ghetto too, but I can't stand it. I'm sorry, I'm traumatized.
I but you also are you have your ways of handling ghetto also, which are much more mature than most people. And I
It's
think
called
that
running.
okay. There's something to be said for like having some battle scars and just knowing what to take seriously and what not to be worried about.
Mm.
Um, a lot of the fussiness around the externals, like this, there's a debate in our community about Vaishnav attire and wearing a dhoti and versus wearing Western attire. And all of the absurdity around that discussion misses the real point, which is that most people want you to wear a dhoti, or those who are so like compulsively needing you to wear Vaishnav attire, just want to do that so they can have a very easy way of measuring you. As soon as you're not externally presenting yourself to be a good devotee, then they have to know you personally and do the hard work of then examining you and judging you based on their personal interaction with you, rather than just easily being able to say good or bad based on what you're wearing.
Right.
So in our community, and this becomes necessary the larger things get, right? If you're in a temple room of 300 people, it's exhausting to have to feel the need to like examine and understand the makeup of each individual. So then you need those external cues. So we're fortunate at our community that I only have a couple dozen people I have to care about. And that's kind of my capacity. So
Right.
rather than looking for more people to care about, I try to keep things in a place where I'm able to care for and create an atmosphere of care for those who will come. And then the other part is, just as you were asking me the question, I just have faith in the process because it's gotten me this far. And if somebody is demonstrating faith in the process, I have faith in the power of bhakti over the other thing that they're also dealing with.
Mm.
Um, and it's like it's a challenge to me. Like, how much do I care and believe in bhakti compared to whatever awkward, inconvenient external thing this person is acting as right now? And every time I've put that on the altar, every time I brought that to Krishna and said, now this is my faith in you and your process. Now I'm creating this for this person. You do something with them. He's gotten rid of the ones that are insincere and not, potentially dangerous for the rest of the community. And he's somehow or other kept around the ones that even I couldn't deal with, but could be supported and helped by the community as a whole. And that's a very faith affirming experience for me to see how it's actually not so much me, but just as Karuna put it, an atmosphere of care coming from so many that eventually brings a person to their own faith and determination in bhakti despite their awkwardness.
Karuna, amazing answer, Deva. I just love that. It's such a simple phrase, but faith in the process, and it kind of puts me on what do you say? Like, do you not have faith in the process? I'm like, I don't know, Christian. It's love of ghetto. If the ghetto is too steep, then faith gets a little bit weak. So I really appreciating that. For you, Karuna, hearing you share your story as vulnerably as you did. And you also making the point about being nestled in a community so that principles and details kind of flow seamlessly and so on. And at the present moment, you are practically isolated from everyone. How does that translate in your head in terms of like the need to like go to such a community or find such a community that's available, or is it just more like I had japa trauma, I got people calling me demons and shit because I don't wear neck beads, and I'm over you, like I'm just totally over you, I'm not gonna even look. Like, I'm curious at how that's translating in your head with these sorts of dynamics playing out. Like, do you feel the need to go find some place where you can be nestled and grow? You're more like, yeah, I'm over it right now. Like, what's going on there?
Yeah. Great question. Well, I'll begin by saying that I honestly do not feel like any less of a devotee than I did when I was practicing, on the level, so to speak. Like, like in my heart, my daily experience, thinking of Krishna, feeling Krishna, being grateful for everything that I have. Um, I genuinely don't feel like any less a devotee, and I don't have any animosity or resentment towards Krishna or the devotees on any level whatsoever. I love the devotees, like God, like, you know the best, like, most wholesome, warm, enlightened people that I'd ever met. But I'll say this: I deeply analyzed sort of like my primary motivation for coming to Krishna consciousness in the first place, and that was the the like seeking a sense of belonging amongst people that I felt like really genuinely accepted me. And I found family and brotherhood and deep loving relationships with the devotees that I first joined Krishna consciousness with, and then later on, with guys like you. But unfortunately, you're on a different freaking continent, and like, I need hugs and stuff. So like, I need to like I need to cook for you guys. I need to chant kirtan with y'all. Like like it ain't good enough to be this is great. I mean, God, I love this so much. But we need to share in person. Anyway, so the point is, it's really that sense of belonging that I'd experienced, and that sense of connection. Um and that is really what's most important to me. And honestly, the philosophy is beautiful, it's great, the practices are all pure and very cleansing and stuff, but like, it's really the people and the loving relationships that compel me. And so, to answer your question, yes, I do believe that one day I will get on a plane and I will go to the USA, the land of the free and the brave, and I will, come and
For
join you
now.
guys over there. you know
Mhm.
well, yeah, let's see where that goes. um but and once again, I mean, I'm sort of like involuntarily vulnerable, so I'll just speak the truth. About a month ago, oh yes, I already mentioned this festival that I attended called Scintilla, based on these principles of Burning Man, which I actually think I'd like to share, because I think, like, you know we when you hear these things, it resonates, because I think these are like very universal principles. So the 10 principles are as follows: radical inclusion. Anyone could be a part of Burning Man. We welcome and respect the stranger. No prerequisites exist for participation in our community. We see very much the same thing in our ISKCON temples, don't we? That end up being what I like to call ashrylums. Um, Gifting.
That's a good
Gifting
one.
is a second. what? What's that? What's that?
He likes a Shrylum.
Ashrylum. I'm kind of mad at myself for not coming up with that.
So David is really good at branding things, so he's a little salty.
Okay, so the second principle is gifting. Ah, one of the six loving exchanges, ain't it? Devoted to acts of giving, the value of the gift is unconditional. Gifting does not contemplate a return or exchange for something of equal value. Decommodification. In order to preserve the spirit of gifting, our community seeks to create social environments that are unmediated by commercial sponsorships, transactions, etc. Radical self reliance encourages the individual to discover and exercise on their inner resources. Radical self expression arises from the unique gifts of the individual. No other than the individual or collaborating group can determine its content. Communal effort. Our community values creative cooperation and collaboration. Civil responsibility, leaving no trace. Our community respects the environment. Participation. Everyone's got to render some seva, right? Our community is committed to a radically participatory ethic. And immediacy. Immediate experience is, in many ways, the most important touchstone of value in our culture. Raganuga Bhakti Hari Bol. Um, so these principles are really, really beautiful. And in this environment that I find myself at, this little miniature Burning Man type festival, Oh my God, the love was flowing like anything. The affection and the warmth and the acceptance and the abundance of loving exchanges between human beings was just profoundly abundant. Um, and I felt so incredibly held, and it was actually in one sense a very jarring experience, because I'd never thought that I would experience a sense of community outside the context of bhakti. I never thought that it would be possible, um, but I had found that. And so consequently in the past month, you could say that I've kind of discovered like a tribe, to some extent. And the sort of like synergy, and no, synergy is not the right word, the sort of synchronicity with which those of us who found each other in this space have sort of reconnected and kept connection, and just randomly bumped into each other like in a massive city. It's just been absolutely insane. And so, to answer your question finally, Jai, I have now found a sense of belonging in the space that I'm in. And um and I found that sense of connection, and that to me is the most important thing. Now, one last final thing that I'll say is, when people come together, they come together over certain bonding mediums, right? So within our spiritual society, within Bhakti society, the bonding medium is the process. It's prasad, it's chanting, it's revealing our minds in confidence, all these beautiful things that we share in the Bhakti community. Now, these things also apply in the other community. Well, not all of it, but a lot of it, in terms of loving exchanges, also apply in this other community of people that I've become involved with. But then, of course, out there in the world, you basically see that people kind of like become alienated from each other when there is no more shared sense gratification. Um, you know that's basically what happens. And I will honestly say that there is enjoyment. Like, I will not deny that. I will not deny that. But to be honest, I'm having such a great time. I feel so happy. I feel so joyful. And after coming out of, like, you could say, like a legacy, like God, the depression for the past like 2 3 years, from the end of 2 years, maybe end of 2019 until the middle of next year. um and I feel happy again, and that happiness is is undeniable. So, but I was in a very similar space in 2015 on a little detour, and I got pretty disillusioned pretty quickly and needed to be with the devotees again. So, it may take me a few months, it may take
Yay!
me.
We were waiting for that part of the story where everything crumbles and you have to come running back to Krishna.
Yeah, for sure. Anyway, so like I'm probably gonna get whacked in some way, and I'm just curious to see what shape that will take. But honestly, like, I'm happy where I am right now. And as I said, I still feel very connected to Krishna, and I've shared my story with everyone, like all of my closest people, all of my closest devotee friends, and the amount of understanding and acceptance and love that I've received from them. I mean, Jai was one of the first. We were going to have a podcast about 3 weeks ago, and I come into the studio, and there's Jai and Mukunda and Madhurika. Mukunda and Madhurika from South Africa. They saw me grew up in Krishna consciousness. I love them so deeply. And I had a very fragile moment. It was like, it was 3 days after Scintilla. I was still trying to digest the experience. And about half an hour before the podcast, I had a conversation with my mom, and I just started bawling my eyes out, over so many things. So I entered into the studio, and there's Jai and Mukund and Madhurika, and I'm feeling so fragile. And I told them, look, guys, like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to show up to the space properly. They're like, no, 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 it's cool, it's cool, it's cool. Oh man, and I look at their faces and I see the love in their eyes, and then I started crying. Oh my God, ask Jai. It was like, it was
That's what we call it, ugly cry. And I'm
it
talking
was
about ugly crying for
despicable.
like 25 minutes. I'm like, yeah, nigga, that's a lot of crying.
but but Jai was so gracious in the moment, even though he's so emotionally insensitive. Actually, he was so gracious in the moment. and he, and and they said, no, we don't have to do the podcast. And then I just proceeded to tell them my story of everything that I'd gone through in the past few months. And they were so understanding and so incredibly loving. So basically, I feel like I accept myself and everyone that I really care about and genuinely love and that love me back. I feel acceptance and love from them. So basically, anyone can say whatever the hell they want. It's not going to make any difference to me because I know I'm good. And I'm curious to see, how Krishna's going to, what's going to happen. Anyway, that's my story.
I like the part of the story where you had this experience in 2015 and everything like crumbled and you can I really like that part of the story. But I was going to say, before you got to that part of the story, I was going to say I'm older. I'm not old, but I am older. And one thing I noticed as I'm getting older is that you kind of become like cynical. it's just a thing with getting old. And I think I'm going to be one of those happy old people because I have a justice mentality. But I do see I have to fight against cynicism that increases kind of more as you get older. So hearing like about your happy moments, that old person cynical side was coming up like, man, Negro, these people, just give it a couple of months, dude. Go live with them and see what happens. There was a part of me that was like that, which is just natural in a community. But I wanted to say though, hearing your whole thing is I was Dinabandhu Prabhu, famous Dinabandhu who takes everyone for Parikrama and Braj. He came to Chicago one year. And I was selected to be his driver. So I was like driving him this place and that place, which was like an amazing service to get to talk to him. And I didn't really know who he was. I wasn't that into him. I remember seeing him in Vrindavan, but wasn't that into him. And just serving him was just like one of the most amazing experiences. And I remember having a specific car ride with him where I was kind of complaining about Gurukuli type devotees, how they like wilding out and they're doing the Krishna conscious thing or whatever. I don't even remember exactly what I was complaining about, but I know it was a complaint. And he was so gracious with transforming like negativity into positive energy, not to sound new agey, but he was really good at that. And when I was complaining about these devotees, whoever they were, I don't even remember who it was. He said, anyway, my experience, he said they're just young, just doing their thing, but they are Krishna's devotees. And so when it really comes down to it, they'll always come running back to Krishna. And I don't know, that impacted me so profoundly that it completely changed the way that I thought about all devotees, especially when they start struggling. It was the way he said it. And he was very grave when he said it. He's like, at least my experience of him was kind of like happy-go-lucky, jolly, like type, But he was very grave when he said it, and it impacted my psyche. Like it was like hit me like a strong wave of a tsunami or something. The way it was communicated, and he says anyway, when it comes down to it, they are Krishna's bhaktas, and just like in Braja, whenever anything goes down, the first thing they say is Krishna, Krishna, no matter what it is, whatever's going down. He said in the same way, when it comes down to it, they'll always come running back to Krishna. And so that really transformed the way that I thought about devotees in general, even when they're struggling, that maybe that devotion side may appear to be covered. But when it really comes down to it, at the end of the day, when death is coming upon you also even, then they are Krishna's bhaktas. And that's really the point that matters. So I was kind of hearing your story in the light of my experience with Dinabandhu also. I don't know, David Madhava, if you have anything on that or just in general from hearing Karuna Avatar's story.
Yeah, I echo of that's what I kind of meant by trusting the process also. Like these people have a relationship with Krishna and that can't be shaken. Our mutual friend Ujjval likes to reference that line from Prabhupada's purport, you will be forcibly dragged.
I love that. That's one of my favorite purports.
You will be forcibly dragged. And as a leader, community, whatever, I don't have to do the dragging, actually. It's not up to me to impose that on someone's existence. Krishna will do that for them because he loves them. And to accept them. And I appreciate that from Karuna, that kind of radical acceptance. I found that to be very powerful because the devotee, when someone's being forcibly dragged by God, the first thing they're going to do is look at the devotees and try to find some fault in them to excuse themselves from having to come back, right? these people are criticizing me, these people are shaming me, whatever. So if we're not doing that, then it really takes the wind out of the sail of their excuses to not come back to the devotees and just accept this is where my happiness really is, even despite the awkwardness, despite the difficulty. Karuna, as you were sharing that, I've spent a lot of time in the rainbow community, and that's kind of the burning community is you could say second generation or a reboot of the rainbow culture. Right. And so just one thing about that acceptance element, that idea of like radically accepting people, regardless of where they're at and what they're doing. If you go to Rainbow, you come to see the danger of that, the danger of the loss of principle. And even the old rainbows will admit this now, because there's so many that go to the rainbows today. And rainbow gathering, for those that aren't familiar, in the 70s, when you could literally take a match and light a river on fire in Cleveland or Detroit or Gary, Indiana, because there was so much pollution. Just the America was such a filthy place because of the industrialism and the lack of you could literally light a river on fire. There was just oil and chemicals so much on top of the water, as one example of what was wrong. Then a lot of things started to change, but one of the things, these rainbow people started to have gatherings on national land to try to like pray. It was basically like it was a yajna in their own understanding. Come together, pray, and make this demonstration that we need to take care of the environment. So it started off as a kind of beautiful seed. And at its peak, 40 or 50,000 people would come to these. And the Hare Krishnas made themselves pillars of that. Radhanath Maharaj became known as the Rainbow Swami. Very beautiful stories and whole Leela of sorts from this community. But today, if you go to the gatherings, you might find 10 to 12,000 people at the most. And at least half of them are what they call like drainbows, like not rainbows, rainbows. People who are just there to leech and suck off of the ethic of giving that community is founded on. And you see the old rainbows who like really worked hard to make something beautiful and make this culture of acceptance and back to the land. You see them resenting these punks, and they're just gutter punks. If you know what that is in a city, they're just literally just covered in gunk, sitting there with their dog and their baby and their like half girlfriend with the sign up like, you know, give me something because you have to, kind of thing. And there's just like 6,000 of them that will go to the rainbow because they know that the people there are forced to give them food, forced to give them drugs, and like tolerate their existence for 3 weeks. So by their own ethic. So they're held at ransom by their own kind of principle of radical acceptance, because that they don't have any other principle to live to except acceptance, which in this material world is a very dangerous principle to live by. So not to like, I'm not trying to rain on the parade, but I just had a recent at this gathering we go to called Yoga Fest. And there I was invited to be a part of a community panel where they had people from different yoga communities speaking on their leaders from different yoga communities speaking on community development. And I got it wasn't an awakening, but it was a reminder at that panel that there's nothing special about community building. There's nothing like Krishna conscious about creating a nice community space. Everybody does it the same way when it works, and everybody does have these same basic principles. And there's nothing very Krishna conscious about the way that I do it, unless the Bhagavatam and the holy name are in the center at the end of the day. Madhavananda Prabhu likes to mention one writer, her name Mary something, I forget last name, but she says, eating together, singing together, dancing together, and telling stories together. This is what creates a powerful community. So then what's the difference between our what's so special about our bhakti communities? We have our stories, we have our food, we have our songs, we have our dance, but so do the other guys. So then the speciality is in one sense not so special, and being a part of that yoga community reminded me of that. It's like, unless I'm really connecting with Krishna, unless it's really about bhakti, then it's not so special or unique over here as compared to over there, and I might as well just go over there. I'm really doing it for Krishna.
Well, you know, I've been like I completely hear what you're saying about this. You could say pollution that may enter into this particular space, that I currently find myself in. And it hasn't been a long time, but thus far I've experienced real authenticity of people who really genuinely follow and respect these principles in a very, very beautiful way. um and so for now, whilst I'm having that experience, I feel like it's an experience that I want to honor. But I do see where it can potentially
It could
go,
go.
and the
Yeah.
disillusionment that I may find. But I'm sort of in a space where it's like, I'm gonna ride the wave and I'm gonna see where it goes. And I do believe that, like, whatever I'm gonna experience in the next while, part of this sort of chapter of my life, is definitely gonna teach me a lot of important lessons. And I hope to ultimately be able to find. And also, it's just like, my my heart is rooted so deeply in, like, Krishna conscious truth and principles. And sometimes I'm astounded by, like, even in that space, in a space where there's no overt Krishna element, like how in engagement with others, like, Krishna still shows up so much for me in the way that I communicate, in the way that I treat people, just in the way that I interact. And so, like, I know where my heart is at the deepest level, and I'm just really curious. I think at this moment in time, I'm just really curious to see where it goes. And yeah, you know.
One thing I'm hearing as we're, I guess, maybe nearing the conclusion of this conversation, which has been great. I've had a really slow morning. I was like, oh, I got the podcast in the morning. I don't know. I'm kind of tired. This is too much. I'm overwhelmed. And now I'm feeling very invigorated by the conversation we've had here. But one thing that I'm hearing as we're coming to the close, one thing that I'm getting, I should say, rather, from the conversation is that, to the point that you made earlier, David Madhava Prabhu, it's important for us as individuals to take inventory of the rules in terms of our own life, not how others are following, which is, I think this is a general weakness of the neophyte mentality, because of insecurity concerning their own convictions about the reality of what they're doing. They need confirmation from the outside world, and therefore the need to, like, judge how others are following the rules in order to make sure that they're doing the right thing or whatever. Like, neophytes are always really into what others are doing, what they're thinking. You have to think the right ways and all that. But as you say, as far as the ruled life is concerned, that's really for us. And I think the relationship we have with rules in the Western world is really unhealthy because of the sort of, maybe the Abrahamic traditions background of the Western world. It's left that, like, nasty scent or energy signature where it's just an imposition. Whereas rules are also
arbitrarily.
Arbitrarily. Whereas the relationship of the rules, at least how I see them from the Vedas, is like a protection of the jiva for his, so he can rise. So, in understanding that, still I don't follow them. I mean, it's like I follow them to whatever degree that I can, my conditioning allows and all that. But my concern should be about how I'm following that and how that's helping me to rise and, inform my own life and development and devotional identity. And if I could, like, retract from my need to judge others and how they're doing that, then your statement was, David Madhava Prabhu, it takes the sails out of the wind of an excuse to not come back to devotees when things do fall apart, because that is the nature of the material world. Sakalaneha Marita Yoga Nashtapanantapa. With the great passing of time, everything is eroded. We live on the innervating plane of existence. And if Krishna really is at the core, but you kind of left and you're looking for an excuse to not come back, then we don't want to be the reason why someone doesn't come back. Like, how much of a disservice that is. And, like, just because our conversation is kind of concluding, like, for someone to, like, say, like, you look like a demon. Now, you may have a point. You may have a point. Like, if someone had said that to me, I would have been like, you may have a point. But you telling me that I look like a demon, you think that's going to encourage me to not be a demon? Like, what's your thinking about that? Like, even if you have the point, actually, I am a demon. So you hit the point right on the mark. But you telling me that, especially I don't have a relationship with you, do you think that's going to encourage me to embrace being a devotee again? Like, what's going on with that? So I'm taking from this conversation, like, the real world life is meant for my upliftment, for my nourishment of my identity as a devotee. And I should do it. I should follow it as such and not be the reason for someone else not feeling belongingness to the community because of my trying to impose that standard or sincere principles on them.
Yeah,
And
man.
taking that out of this.
I David, do you have something to share right now? I have a sort of a final little can of worms, but if you have any thoughts, please go ahead.
Okay. Well, first, I wanted to appreciate your transparency and honesty through the whole conversation, and just in general. That's one of the things I love about you as a person and our friendship. It always challenges me to be more forthcoming and like more hard on my sleeve than I might normally be.
Thanks, brother.
Not me.
But I wanted to say, based on my last comment about the Yoga Fest and Rainbow Gathering, I enjoy going to those environments because I do see healthy, and I do have healthy experiences of community with those people outside of the Bhakti context, right? They're my friends. They're people I count on. They count on me, and we don't sit and read Bhagavatam together, but there is some inherent connection because those inherent principles of community, while I did mention earlier that there's nothing special about them, there also is something special about them. They're true because they do connect you with Krishna, even in an indirect way. It's how you're connecting to the architecture of the universe, the physics of our metaphysics. And so there is a truth there. And I have felt that in other communities, and I do look for it in other communities because our devoted community is deficient and unhealthy. So I don't want to I don't want to make myself out to be a puritanical in that way or sound dismissive.
Yeah.
I
No,
do the same.
100%. Yeah.
And then just the conversation in general reminded me of one of my posts that Jai might call offensive to the devotees. I wrote something a few years ago in America when they made it legal for gay marriage to happen in all states. It became like a federal thing that gay marriage was made legal. And I wrote about it as a victory for religion, actually. And of course, that upset many people because in a kind of shallow way, homosexuality is considered to be a-religious, against the principles of God. And my point was that we see marriage, as with everything else, becoming prostituted to the purposes of other things aside from God already. And in most marriages will end in divorce, and so will these homosexual marriages. However, if there is even one couple who is allowed and now supported more so by their community, including their government, to remain regulated in their lifestyle, because Krishna says, Nityam Yagne Pratishtitam, the eternal transcendence is situated in acts of sacrifice. Regulated activities are prescribed in the Vedas. The Vedas come from Krishna. So this is Bhagavad Gita 3:15, basic understanding of ours. If they have more opportunity to live into healthy regulation via the protection that this law now provides them, then Haribol, that's a success. That those people, to ask them to not be homosexual, we see is too much. It's I wouldn't want to ask that of someone. It's totally there's many things if people
can you please stop being homosexual?
Yeah.
That would be great.
We can just see it. So it's giving more preference to the anyway, it's a different conversation. I don't want to go there, but it's just so unbecoming. Rather, let's support them in what regulation they want to take on for the purpose of their purification and their attempts to serve God. And in that way, that ruling was a success for true religious principle. Although even within our own devotee community, many people took it as the further degradation of Kali Yuga in, how these demons are doing these things. But for me, and I think most people who are sincere in their concept of communal development saw it as a victory.
Joy. Well, Prabhus, excellent. I mean, I was pretty nervous before this podcast because I knew that I was going to, spill the beans. but I'm very happy with this conversation. I think it was beautiful, and I think anyway, my heart is content as per usual after an Arise episode. And I'm so Jai, I love it when you smile. Like, man, that man's smile, like, it's just so radiant. God, just look at all those teeth. Yo. Anyway, yeah, I wanted to sort of open another can of worms, but that's like enough for like another 5 podcasts worth of discussion. So I'm not going to do that.
Okay, we'll do it later then.
I'm grateful to you both. You're my dear friends, and it was just so lovely being with you in this space.
Hey, thank you, Deva, for agreeing. I mean, I know you're about to officiate a marriage, and even then you had time to make for this episode. I love hearing your thoughts. You're just like so wonderfully articulate. You remind me of C.S. Lewis. Like, I like reading C.S. Lewis, and you give me a lot of that C.S. Lewis vibe and your articulation of ideas, which is just amazing.
My pride point in my own heart is having friends like you guys. So thank you for bringing me in. I always love an excuse to associate with both of you.
Haribo. Okay, everyone.
Say a prayer for my sister. It's her wedding today. Bless her that her own attempts at regulation and she stays well protected and comes closer to the Lord in the ways that are appropriate.
Okay, we'll be back on Tuesday. Jai, what are we doing on Tuesday? Do we know?
I have a hunch. I just confirming the speaker, so I'm not gonna say. It's gonna be a really good one. If the speaker confirms, it's gonna be really juicy.
Oh yeah, man!
And something related to Nakula and semen retention and a few other things. So,
ooh, okay. All right, Hare Krishna, everybody. That wraps up episode 47. We're well on our way to episode 52 before the end of this year. Great success.
Well done, guys. Talk about regulation. It's an example of it right there.